don't make this harder. Just hand it over.
Sir, I paid for my groceries. You can check the receipt.
We'll see about that.
Hey! Unbelievable.
So imagine this. It's a Wednesday evening. Nothing special, nothing dramatic. You've just gotten off work. You're tired, and the only thing on your mind is getting home, changing into something comfortable, and cooking dinner. You run into a grocery store for a quick stop, planning to grab a few ingredients and get out. That's all you want. A normal, quiet, boring shopping trip. But instead, 20 minutes later, you're standing at the front of the store with a circle of strangers staring at you. Your personal bag is dumped out on the floor. Your wallet, your keys, your lip balm, your charger, even a stray receipt you didn't know was in there. Scattered everywhere. And the man who dumped it all, the employee who grabbed your bag without permission, is still pointing at you like you're a criminal. Even though he found absolutely nothing. Not an apple, not a candy bar, nothing. That was Maya Thompson's night. A simple grocery run turned into a viral battle for her dignity. Before we dive deeper, where are y'all watching from? The whole thing started so small. Too small, honestly, for what it turned into. Maya walked into Fairway Market right after work. Still in her scrubs, still wearing her badge. Still with that half-exhausted, half-relieved feeling you get at the end of a long shift. She didn't look suspicious. She didn't act suspicious. She didn't feel suspicious. She just wanted pasta. She grabbed a basket, popped in one earbud, and headed straight for produce. She picked up tomatoes, checked a few for ripeness, put one back because it was squishy, grabbed basil, and kept moving. Normal, uneventful. Except someone else was watching her like she was the main act of a crime documentary. Mr. Callahan. 54. Salt and pepper mustache. Been working there longer than most employees were alive. He had that I can spot trouble from a mile away swagger. The kind that wasn't confidence. It was entitlement. And the moment he saw Maya, he locked onto her like she was already a suspect. He followed her from produce to dry goods to the pasta aisle. Every time she paused, he paused. Every time she put something in her basket, he squinted like he was analyzing evidence. At one point, Maya stepped aside to answer a text from her sister. She slipped her personal bag onto her shoulder while holding her basket in the other hand. That was when Callahan decided he had caught her. By the time she made it to self-checkout, he had built a whole fictional backstory in his head. She was hiding items. She was acting nervous. She was checking her phone too much. She had a bag big enough to hide something in, which, by the way, was just a regular purse. Nothing fancy, nothing oversized, just a bag. Maya scanned everything. She bagged everything. She paid. She took her receipt, and she headed for the exit. 2 steps from the door, 2 steps. Callahan rushed in front of her, blocking the path like a linebacker. "Ma'am," he said loud enough for the people in line to hear, "I'm going to need you to open your bag." Maya blinked. "Sorry, why?" "You didn't scan everything. You put items in your purse." She felt her stomach drop. "I didn't put anything in my purse," she said calmly. Callahan folded his arms. "Ma'am, don't make this harder. Just hand it over." A couple customers turned their heads. Maya clutched her bag strap. "Sir, I paid for my groceries. You can check the receipt." He didn't want the receipt. He grabbed the strap of her bag before she could even react. "Hey!" Maya exclaimed. Callahan yanked it off her shoulder and held it up like a trophy. "If you're innocent, you won't mind," he announced. Then, right there in front of everyone, he flipped Maya's bag upside down and dumped everything on the floor. Keys, wallet, lip balm, earbuds, a hair tie, phone charger. It all scattered across the tile with a loud clatter. A woman at the nearest register gasped. Another person muttered, "What the?" Maya's face burned. And Callahan? He crouched down and sifted through her things with the confidence of someone certain he'd find stolen goods. Except he didn't, because there were none. He stood up slowly, confused. Then, instead of apologizing, he doubled down. She hid it. he said. She passed it to someone else. I know what I saw. That line, I know what I saw, would later become infamous. Because the only thing he saw was his own bias. A nearby shopper, Jordan White, pulled out their phone and started recording. Callahan didn't care. You're not leaving this store, he told Maya, still blocking the exit. Not until we get to the bottom of this. Maya steadied her voice. Get the manager. Lena, the teen cashier who had witnessed everything, looked terrified but finally spoke up. I saw her scan everything. Callahan snapped. Stay out of this. But it was too late. People were watching. And that was the moment. The exact moment. Things shifted. The store manager, Mr. Patel, came hurrying down the front aisle like he'd just heard someone yell, "Clean up in aisle 5." Except this cleanup was about to be a whole PR disaster. He saw Maya's belongings scattered across the floor first. Then he saw Callahan standing in front of her like a nightclub bouncer. What is happening here? Patel asked, already sounding overwhelmed. Callahan didn't miss a beat. She stole items, he barked. I caught her hiding things in her purse. I emptied it. She's trying to leave. I need you to call the police. The words hit Maya like a punch. She stepped forward. I didn't steal anything. You can see everything he dumped out of my bag. Nothing from this store is in there. Jordan chimed in, camera still up. I've been recording since he took her bag. She didn't steal anything. He just dumped her stuff for no reason. Lena, the cashier, lifted her hand halfway like a kid at school. She scanned everything, she added quietly. I watched her. Callahan shot her a look sharp enough to cut glass. Patel rubbed his forehead. He looked at the bag contents, then at Maya, then at Callahan. Let's check the cameras, he said finally. Callahan scoffed. We don't need cameras. I saw her steal. Patel cut him off. We're checking the cameras. Maya kept her composure, but her breath trembled slightly as she picked up her things from the ground. Jordan moved with her, handing her items carefully, before following her towards the back office, still recording. Patel brought up the footage. They went aisle by aisle, transaction by transaction, and it was all there. Maya picking up items, Maya scanning them, Maya paying, Maya putting groceries into the store-provided bag. Maya's purse never even opening the entire time. There wasn't a single moment, not one, where she did anything even close to suspicious. Patel's face turned pale. Callahan's face turned red. Maya stayed silent. When the footage ended, Jordan whispered, Wow, just wow. Patel sighed deeply. Callahan, she didn't take anything. Callahan's jaw clenched. He pointed at the screen like the footage was lying to him. She must have done something off camera. I know what I saw. These people. He didn't even finish the sentence, because everyone in that room knew where he was going and who he meant by these people. Jordan caught the entire thing on video. Patel held up a hand. That's enough. Callahan, step outside. Callahan slammed the office door on the way out. Maya swallowed a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. Patel finally turned to her. I'm truly sorry. This shouldn't have happened. But Maya's eyes said what she couldn't. An apology doesn't make this disappear. She gathered her things and left. Jordan walked with her out of the store. As soon as they stepped onto the sidewalk, Jordan spoke. Listen, this is going to sound weird, but would you be okay if I posted the video? Maya hesitated. She didn't want attention. She didn't want drama, but she did want truth. She wanted accountability. She wanted what happened to be seen, not buried. She nodded. Post it. And Jordan did. That night, the video hit 200K views, 500K views. By morning, it was everywhere. People were outraged. Fire him. Callahan needs consequences. Why did he dump her bag like that? This is textbook profiling. Protect Maya. Reporters messaged. Creators stitched the video. The hashtag #shopping while black trended for hours. Maya woke up to a phone full of notifications, messages from coworkers, and about 48 missed calls from unknown numbers. The truth was out. But the fight? The fight was just beginning. By the time Maya got to work the next morning, her phone was blowing up so much she had to silence it. People she hadn't talked to in years were messaging her. "Girl, is this you? Please tell me you're okay. I saw the video. I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Her coworkers whispered the moment she walked into the break room. One of them hugged her. Another just shook her head and said, "That man is done." Maya felt a mix of exhaustion and adrenaline. Yes, the truth was out there now. But the humiliation, the anger, the memory of her belongings scattered on a dirty grocery store floor, that didn't go away overnight. Around lunchtime, she got a message that made her stop breathing for a second. "Hi, Maya. My name is Sandra Lee. I'm a civil rights attorney. I'd like to speak with you about what happened." Maya stared at the message. She knew that name. Sandra had handled cases involving discrimination, wrongful detention, workplace bias. She was legit. Not one of those, "call me if you slipped in aisle 4" lawyers, she responded. They met that same evening. Sandra didn't waste time. She'd seen Jordan's video. She'd watched it multiple times, and she was fired up. "Maya," she said, leaning forward, "what he did was unlawful. Dumping your purse? That's a violation of your personal property. Blocking your exit? That's unlawful detention. Accusing you publicly without proof? That's defamation. And the racial profiling is obvious." Maya nodded slowly. I don't want drama." Sandra gave a small smile. "Drama already found you. What happens next is about justice." They filed 3 actions. 1. A complaint with the grocery company's corporate office. 2. A civil rights complaint with the state. 3. A lawsuit for damages. Within 48 hours, local news picked up the story. Within 72 hours, national outlets had it. Maya didn't want to be a symbol. She didn't want to be trending. But suddenly people everywhere were talking about her case. Some customers even came forward anonymously saying, "Callahan has done stuff like this before." Oh yes, that was a whole thing. The grocery chain tried to get ahead of the scandal by releasing a PR statement full of corporate buzzwords. "We value our customers. We take this seriously. We're conducting an internal review." But then, the receipts started coming out, literal and metaphorical. During discovery, Sandra obtained employee reports and HR logs. Guess what they showed? Callahan had accused several other customers, mostly black or brown, of stealing in the past. And not once did he have proof. Not once did security footage confirm anything. Not once did corporate discipline him beyond a verbal warning. When Sandra presented that pattern to the court, the judge raised an eyebrow so high it could have jumped off her face. Callahan took the stand looking like he wished he could melt through the floor. He tried to defend himself. "I know what I saw. She was acting suspicious." Sandra questioned him with surgical precision. "Did you see her take anything?" "No." "Did the camera show her taking anything?" "No." "Did her bag contain anything from the store?" "No." "Then on what basis did you publicly accuse her of theft?" He had no answer, just stuttering and anger simmering under the surface. Then came the video. Jordan's footage was played on a large screen in the courtroom. Every second of Callahan grabbing Maya's purse, dumping her belongings, finding nothing, doubling down anyway, saying "people like her" out loud, blocking her from leaving. The judge didn't need hours. She didn't even need half a day. She ruled in Maya's favor on all counts: emotional distress, public humiliation, defamation, unlawful detention, violation of personal property. The grocery company was ordered to pay a settlement. Callahan was officially fired. The kind of fired where they escort you out and disable your badge before you hit the parking lot. And as part of the settlement, the store was required to implement anti-profiling training, a new policy for detaining suspected shoplifters, a mandatory review process before accusing customers publicly. Maya didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She just exhaled. feeling lighter for the first time in weeks. But Callahan? Oh, his downfall was only beginning. People dug up everything. Reviews mentioning the rude older guy who follows customers around. Social media posts from former employees saying he treated certain customers differently. Screenshots of shoppers complaining about the man with the mustache who stalks people. Someone even made a compilation of his worst quotes from the viral video. Another person auto-tuned, "I know what I saw," into a remix. Callahan went from grocery employee to internet villain of the week. But the consequences didn't stop with memes. Remember, Callahan wasn't just an employee. He had lived in the community for decades. So when everything came out, neighbors who once waved at him suddenly started ignoring and avoiding him. His reputation was flattened. Parents didn't want him volunteering at school events anymore. Local shops refused to rehire him. Even the neighborhood Facebook group banned him after he made a defensive rant about false accusations. The irony, huh? With all the coverage online, every hiring manager who Googled him saw the viral video and dozens of comments saying he always targeted minorities. No one wanted to take that kind of risk. He applied at another grocery chain. Rejected. He applied at a home improvement store. Rejected. Fast food places. Rejected. One manager even told him bluntly, "We can't hire someone who publicly humiliated a customer." The deeper consequences came later. People reported that Callahan became withdrawn, angry, bitter, pacing his apartment late at night, always muttering that he didn't deserve this. But here's the twist. He still didn't believe he was wrong. He told anyone who would listen that Maya had gotten away with something, even when the court ruled against him. He clung to his own imagination instead of the truth, and that stubborn refusal to face reality is what ruined his life more than anything else. For weeks, Maya had been carrying around this invisible weight, the humiliation, the anger, the shock of being treated like a criminal for simply shopping. Even after winning the lawsuit, the viral attention, the apology emails, and the massive online support, her body still remembered everything. Healing is an instant, but slowly, quietly, life started to shift back into place. One evening, Maya sat at her parents' house, sipping tea at the kitchen table. Her mom slid a hand across the table and squeezed hers gently. "You know," her mom said softly, "I've had similar things happen to me. I just never told you." Maya looked up surprised. Her mom nodded. "Different decade, same assumptions." A pause. "But I'm proud of you. You didn't let them walk over you." For the first time since the incident, Maya let herself cry. Not out of sadness, but out of release. Eventually, life settled into a new rhythm. She wasn't that woman in the video anymore. She was Maya, sister, daughter, coworker, friend. What happened didn't define her, but it did shape her. She was stronger now, more sure of herself, less willing to shrink for anyone. And she promised herself this: if she ever saw someone else going through what she went through, she wouldn't hesitate to step in, just like Jordan did for her. Because sometimes justice starts with a single person hitting record. The main lesson from Maya's case is clear. She was accused because of racial bias, not because of anything she actually did. Nothing in her behavior suggested theft. The only thing that made her a suspect in Callahan's mind was the fact that she was a black woman shopping alone. The only reason the situation escalated is because Callahan made assumptions tied directly to her race. But everyone deserves equal treatment, and no one should be accused or singled out because of the color of their skin.
Oh, don't put your stuff there yet!
Sir, my items aren't near yours. Sir, step back. Give her space.
I didn't threaten to hit her!
God bless you, sir.
A white man had a meltdown at a local Fresh Mart outside St. Louis, got up in a black woman's face at self-checkout, and it went viral fast. People didn't share it because it was entertaining. They shared it because it was familiar. One of those moments where someone decided the public space belonged to them, and they expected everyone else to shrink. And in the clip, you could see the exact second it stopped being a checkout dispute and started being about intimidation. Now, before the details, tell me where you're watching from, your city, state, or country. And if you're here for real story times where people keep their dignity and accountability follows, hit like and subscribe. Because the only reason situations like this change is when people stop letting them disappear. Here's what actually happened, in order. It was a typical busy evening in Freshmart's self-checkout. The lighting was harsh, the machines were beeping, and everyone moved like they were trying to get out of there without any extra problems. One clerk oversaw multiple kiosks, which meant customers were mostly left to manage themselves, unless something broke or someone got loud. Janelle Rivers walked into that store like thousands of people do every day. Quick trip, basic items, head down, no interest in conflict. She wasn't scanning the room for trouble. She was thinking about dinner the next day and getting home. Keith Mallory was already at a kiosk when she got there. White guy, Cardinals cap. The kind of posture that took up a little extra space on purpose. His transaction finished before hers even started. That part mattered, because the whole argument later tried to pretend the opposite. Keith stayed in the lane. He didn't step over to the side, bagging shelf the way stores expect. He kept bagging right in the station's working area. Slow, deliberate movements, retying bags, rearranging items, sliding things around like he had all night and everyone behind him could wait. That alone wasn't a crime, it was just inconsiderate. The problem was the way he reacted when someone treated the station like it was open, because it was. Janelle stepped up to the kiosk and began placing her items down to start scanning. She didn't touch his cart. She didn't bump him. She didn't shove past him. She simply did what any customer would do when a machine looked available. Keith turned like she'd challenged him. He snapped at her immediately, sharp voice, hard stare, and positioned his body so the space became tighter. He acted like she had disrespected him by moving forward, even though his transaction was already done. And he didn't just complain quietly. He made sure other people could hear, because volume is a tool when you're trying to control a situation. Janelle didn't match the volume. She didn't throw insults. She didn't step into his space. She stayed steady and pointed out the basic reality. He was finished paying, and she was trying to start. Keith rejected that reality and replaced it with his own. He framed it like she was rushing him, cutting him, trying to push him out. He treated a normal checkout moment like it was a personal attack. That's when the clerk, Mia Patel, noticed. Mia had been doing the usual self-checkout sprint, fixing scanner errors, helping with age checks, answering questions people should have asked before they walked in. But Keith's tone wasn't normal frustration. It had that edge that makes employees instantly alert, because it can go from words to danger in a blink. Mia walked over and tried to redirect the moment back into something manageable. She reminded Keith the station needed to keep moving, and asked him to finish bagging at the side shelf. Keith didn't respond like someone being offered a solution. He responded like someone being corrected in public. He raised his voice more, he talked over her, and then he did something that, in hindsight, told everyone exactly where his head was. He started insisting he hadn't threatened Janelle, before anyone had even formally accused him of that. He said it like he was planting a flag, like he was writing his defense in real time. But at the same time, he kept crowding. Janelle asked for space. She didn't dramatize it, she didn't beg. She stated it like a boundary that mattered. Keith moved closer anyway. That's how power works in small public conflicts. One person tries to shrink the other without leaving bruises. It's proximity, posture, tone, and pressure, forcing the other person to either retreat or react. And if the other person reacts, the aggressor gets to point and say, "See, that's the problem right there." Janelle didn't react the way he wanted. She stayed controlled. She held her items close, not because she was being petty, but because she clocked what he was doing. She kept her body angled away, enough to avoid contact, but firm enough not to be pushed backward. She focused on the checkout task, refusing to let him turn it into a personal back and forth. That refusal irritated him more. Now the people around them started noticing. You could always tell when a grocery store scene crossed the line from awkward to alarming. Beeps stopped. Carts paused mid-push. Heads turned without fully turning. A couple people gave that quick look toward the front, like they were calculating whether staff would step in or whether they should. And one bystander, Thomas Jenkins, made the decision that changed everything. He pulled out his phone and started recording. Not with big gestures, not with commentary, just a steady lens pointed toward the self-checkouts, capturing what the store cameras would capture too. Keith's receipt already printed. Keith still blocking. Janelle trying to check out. Mia trying to de-escalate. And the way Keith kept leaning in while insisting he wasn't doing anything. Keith noticed the phone almost instantly, and instead of calming down, he got performative. He leaned into the idea that he was being accused unfairly. He repeated his denial louder. He tried to make it look like he was the one under attack, like the crowd and the clerk and the woman beside him were ganging up on him for no reason. That's another control tactic. Turn the lens into proof of your victimhood while continuing the behavior the lens is recording. Mia's posture changed. You could tell she'd shifted from customer service to safety mode. Her hands stayed visible. She stopped trying to win an argument and started trying to prevent a moment she wouldn't be able to undo. Janelle kept her voice level. She didn't escalate. She didn't insult him. She didn't step forward. She just repeated the boundary and tried to continue scanning. Keith still wouldn't move. He stayed planted, making her checkout physically difficult, and he kept talking over both women, as if his voice could dominate the space and force compliance. He was acting like the store's rules didn't apply to him, as long as he refused to acknowledge them. Then the tension sharpened again. Keith's arm shifted toward Janelle's items on the counter. It wasn't a casual gesture. It had purpose. Janelle tightened her grip on what she was holding. Mia's eyes flicked down toward the counter, then back up to Keith's face. And that's when the call went out. Someone, either Mia or another employee, alerted security to self-checkout. The radio crackle wasn't loud, but it landed like a warning. The store had recognized this as more than a customer being upset. It was now a situation with a timeline, witnesses, and cameras, internal and external. Keith didn't seem to realize what that meant yet. Or maybe he did, and he decided to push harder before anyone could stop him. Because right as the bystander's phone stayed steady, right as Mia held her ground, right as Janelle tried to finish the simple act of paying for groceries, Keith moved like he was about to take control of the counter with his hands. Keith didn't calm down. He escalated. What had started as him refusing to clear the bagging space turned into him treating Janelle like she wasn't allowed to stand where she was standing. His voice stayed high, his posture stayed squared, and he kept repeating the same point, that he hadn't threatened her, like saying it enough times would make everyone ignore what his body was doing in real time. Janelle stayed measured. She didn't trade insults. She didn't step into him. She kept her items close and kept her words short, focused on one thing. She needed him out of her space so she could check out and leave. She said it plainly. Back up. Give space. Let her finish. Keith didn't respect that boundary. In the tight self-checkout lane, he made himself bigger, leaning in, closing distance, forcing the moment to feel personal instead of procedural. And that's when the situation stopped looking like two customers annoyed and started looking like intimidation. Then he crossed into physical behavior. He knocked or shoved some of Janelle's groceries out of the way on the counter, treating her items like obstacles instead of property. And he made quick, aggressive motions toward her that looked like he was trying to scare her into backing off. The exact thing people always argue about later, whether it counts as a swing or not, didn't matter in that moment, because the intent was obvious to the people standing there. It was threatening, it was close, and It was the kind of movement that makes a public space go silent. That silence happened. The beeps from nearby kiosks continued, but fewer people were scanning. Carts stopped rolling, heads turned fully now, not just side-eye. And the phones that were already up stayed up. Because once groceries get shoved and arms start snapping towards someone, witnesses don't assume it'll work itself out. Mia, the clerk, tried to intervene again, but there was only so much she could do without putting herself in danger. She wasn't security. She was an employee stuck in the middle of a customer who wanted control and another customer who just wanted to be safe. Security arrived at the point when it mattered most. Darnell stepped in quickly and did the main thing that changes outcomes. He separated them. He put his body between Keith and Janelle, created space, and directed Keith away from her and away from the kiosk area. He didn't turn it into a shouting match. He treated it like a safety problem, because that's what it was. Keith tried to keep arguing, still denying, still blaming, still trying to make it sound like the whole thing was overreacting. But once security was between them, he lost the one tool he'd been using to control Janelle: proximity. He couldn't crowd her anymore. He couldn't loom over the counter. He couldn't force her to choose between backing up or getting bumped. Janelle stayed composed through the separation. She didn't suddenly become loud because the crowd was watching. She didn't perform. She stated the boundary one more time, simple and clear, that he didn't get to put his hands on her or touch her groceries because he was angry. That's what stuck. Because it wasn't a catchy line. It was the truth of the whole moment. With Keith moved back and security holding the space, the store shifted into procedure. The clerk focused on documenting the incident. Janelle focused on collecting her items and finishing her checkout. Keith kept trying to talk his way into being the victim, but the people around him had already seen enough to understand what actually happened. And by the time the confrontation ended inside Fresh Mart, the story was already leaving the building because the recording didn't stop when security stepped in. The recording was the reason the pressure didn't disappear. The clip didn't spread slowly, it popped. Within hours, people online were tagging Fresh Mart and asking the same question in different ways. What was the store going to do about a customer getting in a woman's face at self-checkout, knocking her groceries around, and needing security to step in? And the reason it moved so fast was simple. The video didn't look complicated. It looked like escalation. It looked like intimidation. It looked like someone trying to bully a black woman in public and assuming nobody would stop it. Multiple angles started circulating, not just one. That's when the narrative battle started. Keith began framing it online as a line issue, saying he was being rushed and disrespected, implying that Janelle had cut him. He leaned hard on technical language, claiming he never threatened her, because it sounded cleaner than addressing what people actually saw. Him taking up space, getting loud, then turning physical with her groceries. Janelle didn't do a back and forth. She posted a short, measured statement and kept it factual. She explained that his payment was already complete when she stepped up. She described the escalation: cursing, crowding, knocking items. Then pointed out the key reason the video mattered, because it showed why she didn't feel safe and why security had to intervene. No insults, no name-calling, just a timeline. And while the internet argued, Fresh Mart did what it always does when a video forces its hand. It went to the systems. They pulled the self-checkout logs tied to the station. Those logs don't care who's louder. They show when the payment was approved, when the receipt printed, and when the transaction ended. They also pulled overhead footage and the self-checkout camera feed to match what customers were posting with what the store had on record. That internal review was the quiet part people don't see. But it's where accountability either happens or gets buried. Fresh Mart's first public response was careful and generic. The standard corporate language about being aware of the incident and reviewing. But behind the scenes, they were building a timeline: transaction complete, lingering at the station, escalation, security call, separation. That timeline turned it from drama online into an incident the company could act on without guessing. And once the review confirmed what the footage and logs showed, Freshmart shifted from cautious to decisive. They issued a formal ban trespass notice against Keith. They followed up their initial statement with clearer language about customer safety and behavior expectations in the store. Not just, we're looking into it, but we addressed it. At the same time, Janelle took the real-world route, not just the internet route. She filed the store incident report and followed up with a police report. Because when someone's behavior crosses into physical intimidation, the record matters. It creates consequences that don't depend on a trending hashtag. Then Keith faced the part that hits hardest in modern situations like this: identification. Once people recognized him and connected a name, calls and messages started reaching the places he couldn't control. In his workplace, community circles, people who knew him in real life. And suddenly the story wasn't something he could explain away as a misunderstanding, because the evidence didn't leave room for that. Once the video spread and Freshmart reviewed what happened, the store moved from looking into it to action. Keith was formally banned from returning, and Freshmart put out a clearer statement focused on customer safety. Janelle followed through the normal way: incident report with the store and a police report, keeping it factual and consistent. And outside the store, Keith faced the kind of consequence cameras create now. Once he was identified, the incident followed him into real life. People contacted his workplace and community circles, and his denial didn't land the same when the footage and store timeline were already out there. On Freshmart's side, the main change was practical. Self-checkout staff were pushed to call security sooner when someone starts crowding, blocking, or escalating, so bagging after payment doesn't turn into another safety issue. After Freshmart issued the ban and confirmed the review, the story stopped being a viral moment and became an example. People kept sharing it for one reason: it showed how fast entitlement can turn into intimidation, especially when someone assumes a black woman will back up just to keep the peace. Janelle didn't spend weeks arguing online. She stayed consistent. She documented what happened, followed the process, and let the evidence speak. That steadiness mattered because it kept the focus on behavior and accountability, not internet drama. Keith tried to minimize it, but the combination of phone footage, witnesses, and the store's own logs made that hard. That's the modern shift. When a timeline exists, denial doesn't have much room to breathe. Freshmart also had to absorb the lesson publicly. They tightened self-checkout expectations, reinforced early security involvement, and made it clear, at least in policy and action, that customer safety comes before protecting an aggressive customer's ego. And the takeaway was simple. In public spaces, the power move is often trying to control the narrative first. Janelle didn't let that happen. She stayed calm, held her boundary, and relied on what actually works: witnesses, documentation, and follow-through. So, here's the question. If you were standing nearby, would you have recorded, gotten staff, or kept your head down and kept scanning? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs the reminder that boundaries matter. And subscribe for more real story times like this, where dignity holds and accountability shows up.
Hey! Step away from the vehicle now. Hands up where I can see them.
Officer, relax. I'm loading training kits and policy binders
Don't
for a
talk.
community meeting.
Step back. Who authorized you to be in this bay?
I did. I'm Assistant Chief Darnell Price.
You
My
are?
credentials are right here. I'm going to hold them steady so you can read them.
That's fake. People flash fake ID.
In the restricted evidence transfer bay behind Raleigh Police Headquarters, Officer Trevor Klein moved fast and loud, like he needed everyone within earshot to understand he was in control. He'd spotted a man at an unmarked department SUV loading sealed materials into the back. From a distance, Klein decided he was watching a theft in progress. He didn't pause to verify access. He didn't start with procedure. He came in hot. He ordered the man to step away from the vehicle. He closed distance quickly. He used that sharp public tone officers use when they wanted compliance first and questions later. The man didn't flinch. He stayed calm and tried to show credentials. Klein refused to even really look, calling them fake and insisting people tried that move all the time. He treated the badge wallet like a prop and doubled down on the confrontation. And that's when the man asked for one simple thing. Something so reasonable, it should have ended the entire situation in seconds. He directed Klein to radio a supervisor and verify the plate assignment. Klein finally keyed his radio. Dispatch confirmed the SUV was assigned to command staff. The name attached matched the man standing there. That should have been the end. But Klein didn't back off. He kept pushing anyway, as if the verification didn't count, as if reality was negotiable. It wasn't panic anymore. It was ego refusing to lose in front of an audience. Then the evidence transfer bay door opened again. A veteran sergeant walked in, took one look at the man Klein was trying to bully, and froze, because he recognized him instantly. And because the sergeant understood something Klein hadn't fully processed yet. The entire exchange had been captured by a fixed bay camera, and Klein's body cam had been turned on late, but not late enough. The scene stopped being a misunderstanding in a restricted area. It became a documented test of the department's culture, recorded from multiple angles, with no room for creative rewriting later. Where are you watching from? Country, state, or city? Drop it in the comments. And if you like story times where calm professionalism meets accountability and cameras make the truth unavoidable, hit like and subscribe. Rewind. Assistant Chief Darnell Price had been newly appointed. Black, respected, and known for staying steady under pressure, he was on a tight schedule that morning. He had a community meeting coming up, and he needed to load sealed training kits and policy binders, materials meant for that meeting, into his unmarked department SUV. The evidence transfer bay was restricted for a reason. It was controlled space, documented space. It wasn't the kind of place where guesses were supposed to replace verification, but Officer Trevor Klein had been assigned to security for property and evidence transport, one of those routine enforcement roles where a person could either learn discipline and restraint or turn authority into a personal weapon. Klein saw Price from a distance and assumed suspect before he confirmed staff. And once he committed to that assumption publicly, he couldn't accept the fastest off-ramp procedure. So even after dispatch confirmed the plate and the name, Klein kept trying to force the moment to end with him winning. That's what made what happened next so important, because the veteran sergeant who walked in wasn't just a witness. He was the first person in that bay who understood how far this was about to go. The veteran sergeant didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stepped fully into the bay, looked from Klein to the man by the SUV, and the pause said everything. This wasn't some random person near a vehicle. This was Assistant Chief Darnell Price, and Klein was still acting like he had caught a thief. Price stayed calm and let the facts stay in control. He didn't posture, he didn't threaten. He repeated the same point he'd already made. The vehicle assignment had been verified, and the materials he was loading were sealed training kits and policy binders for a community meeting. Klein heard it, but he couldn't accept it, because by then the situation wasn't about safety. It was about Klein refusing to back down in front of witnesses and a camera he'd forgotten existed until it mattered. He tried to justify his behavior as doing his job, even though the job had an obvious procedure: verify before escalating. And the worst part for him was that verification had already happened. Dispatch had confirmed the plate was assigned to command staff, and the name matched. In a normal professional encounter, that's where you reset, apologize, and move on. Klein didn't reset. He kept talking like the confirmation didn't count, like the credentials didn't count, like Price's calm didn't count. The sergeant watched it happen with the kind of expression that came from experience, because he understood the chain reaction this creates inside a department. Then the sergeant did what Klein should have done first. He took control of the scene with procedure. He directed Klein to stand down. He addressed Price respectfully. He asked one more time for the basic verification points. Not because he doubted Price, but because he was building a clean, professional record on the spot. And Price gave it quietly, clearly. Now the situation had 3 layers of proof. The restricted bay's fixed camera, Klein's body cam, late but active during the crucial minutes, and the radio dispatch log confirming the plate and assignment. Klein had no room left to claim confusion. What he had left was attitude. And that attitude, captured in a restricted area with oversight cameras, turned this from a mistake into a question people inside the building couldn't dodge. How did an officer feel comfortable treating someone like this after verification? That's where the culture issue surfaced. Because this wasn't just Klein being jumpy. This was a young officer in a control-oriented assignment, treating enforcement like confrontation, assuming suspect first, dismissing credentials, and then refusing to accept confirmed facts. The sergeant didn't debate him. He didn't lecture on the spot. He did the thing that makes accountability real in modern policing. He ensured the footage and the reports would reach the people who couldn't ignore them. Price didn't demand special treatment. He didn't need to. The evidence did the demanding. By the time Price left the bay to head to the community meeting, the incident was already bigger than the two of them. Not because anyone had posted it online yet, because inside that building, the right people now knew there was a recorded confrontation involving command staff that never should have happened in the first place. And if it could happen to a man with credentials, access, and authority, everyone understood what that implied for people who had none. Once Price left for the community meeting, the department moved into damage control mode, but not the public kind, the internal kind. Because this wasn't a complaint from a stranger, it was a recorded confrontation in a restricted bay involving command staff, verified dispatch information, and an officer who still refused to stand down. That meant supervisors couldn't minimize it without implicating themselves. Internal affairs locked down the footage quickly. The fixed bay camera was secured. Klein's body cam was pulled and flagged. Radio traffic and dispatch logs were preserved. The goal was simple. No editing, no missing files, no convenient gaps. And as soon as the clips were reviewed together, the story changed shape. It wasn't just that Klein approached aggressively. It was that he dismissed credentials, got verification, and still kept pressing, like facts were optional if they conflicted with his assumption. That's the point where it stops looking like a training issue and starts looking like a culture issue. So investigators did what they always do when a clean incident exposes a bigger problem. They pulled history. They reviewed prior complaints tied to Klein's assignment area. They looked at how evidence bay officers were trained, what they were told to do before escalating, who supervised them, what verify first actually meant in practice. They checked whether similar confrontations had been written off as routine enforcement because the targets didn't have rank, connections, or credibility inside the building. And more things started lining up. Not necessarily identical incidents, but the same pattern. Aggressive approach, fast suspicion, refusal to accept explanations, and reports that framed confrontation as good police work. The evidence bay role, which should have been about careful procedure, had become a place where certain personalities could turn authority into harassment. That's why leadership couldn't treat it as one bad moment. The problem wasn't only what Klein did, it was how easy it had been for him to do it, confidently, publicly, in a restricted space, while cameras rolled. Klein was suspended. Then the termination process began. The department couldn't keep him in that role, and after the footage, they couldn't keep him in the department without inviting a bigger fight. But Price didn't stop at discipline. He pushed for changes that made it harder for the next Klein to do the same thing. Mandatory verification steps before any enforcement action in restricted areas. Clear supervision requirements for evidence bay officers. Documentation standards that couldn't be optional. And critically, public reporting of profiling complaints so the department couldn't pretend patterns didn't exist. until they were caught on camera. On the city side, a civil rights claim followed, and the city settled, because the documentation made denial expensive. And that's where the story landed for everyone watching inside and outside the department. If an assistant chief with credentials, plate verification, and command authority could still be treated like a suspect, what happened to regular citizens who had none of that protection? What made the fallout different wasn't just that Klein got suspended and fired. It was what the footage forced everyone to admit out loud. Verification had worked, and he ignored it anyway. So Price treated it like a leadership problem, not a personal insult. He didn't chase revenge. He pushed the department to close the exact gaps Klein had used. Because if those gaps stayed open, the next incident would happen to someone without rank, and it would be easier to bury. The new rules were simple and hard to argue with. In restricted areas like the evidence transfer bay, officers had to complete mandatory verification steps before any enforcement action: plate check, access confirmation, supervisor notification. Evidence-based security could no longer operate like a solo power zone. Supervision rules tightened, so a young officer couldn't escalate unchecked. Profiling complaints and outcomes had to be tracked and publicly reported, so patterns couldn't be dismissed as isolated. The city settled the civil rights claim because the documentation made the risk obvious. But the settlement wasn't the real weight of the story. The real weight was what it proved. This happened to command staff with credentials, access, and verification on record. So the question that hung over Raleigh afterward, and the one Price didn't let anyone dodge, was the same one that hit the community immediately. If it could happen to him, what happened to people with no badge wallet, no title, and no one inside the building who recognized their face? Once the policy changes were announced, the department tried to frame the incident as a one-off that had been handled. But inside the building, people knew better because the footage didn't show confusion. It showed a refusal to accept verification. That's why the reforms mattered. They weren't cosmetic. They were designed to remove the exact moments where bias and ego could hide behind "I thought" or "I felt." Price also made sure the message internally was just as clear as the policy externally. Restricted areas were not places for improvisation. The job was procedure. If an officer couldn't follow verification steps, they didn't belong in that assignment. For the public, the case became a reference point, not because it was dramatic, but because it was clean. A calm command staff member, a young officer escalating, dispatch confirming the truth, the officer still refusing to back down, cameras capturing the whole sequence. The city settlement closed the legal chapter, but it didn't erase the question the footage left behind. If someone at Price's level could be treated like that even with credentials and confirmed plate assignment, then the protection regular residents assumed existed was thinner than they wanted to believe. And that's where the story ends, right on that uncomfortable truth. Accountability didn't happen because the system was naturally fair. It happened because the system was forced to face evidence. So, what would you have done in that bay if you were Price, calm but being pushed? And what would you do as a witness, knowing a camera can be the difference between a claim and a fact? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more story times like this, grounded, realistic, and focused on accountability, make sure you subscribe.
Ma'am, I need to step inside, now.
Officer, I'm Judge Alana Whitaker. You do not have consent to enter. Do you have a warrant?
This is an investigation. We can do this the easy way.
The easy way is you staying off my threshold without a warrant.
Officer Derek Halverson stood on a quiet Maplewood porch with his shoulders squared and his voice raised, like the badge was a key. He insisted he needed to come inside immediately. He framed it as urgent police business, the kind of urgency meant to make people step aside without thinking. He added pressure in the same breath: consequences, obstruction talk, the usual intimidation moves. The homeowner didn't step back. She stayed calm, held her ground, and did something that made Halverson's confidence flicker for half a second, like he'd just realized the situation wasn't going to follow his script. Then a small detail changed everything. A phone camera light appeared across the street. Another angle followed from farther down. Quietly, without anyone shouting or intervening, the whole scene started getting recorded. Clean, time-stamped, impossible to misremember later. Halverson noticed, and his face changed in a way that told you he wasn't worried about danger inside the house anymore. He was worried about what he'd already done on the porch, because whatever he'd walked up there planning, it suddenly looked like he had picked the worst possible door in Maplewood to try it on. Where are you watching from? Country, state, or city? Drop it in the comments. And if you like story times, where intimidation meets calm boundaries and accountability actually kicks in, hit like and subscribe. Rewind a few minutes. In Maplewood, Halverson had built a reputation people didn't say out loud, unless they trusted who was listening. Residents described him as the kind of officer who leaned on fear, especially with black residents, using threats and presence to force compliance first and justify it later. That night, he arrived on a residential street, claiming he was working a narcotics investigation. He treated the urgency like it was evidence. He demanded entry as if paperwork was optional, but the homeowner didn't respond like someone caught off guard. She stayed measured and procedural, refusing to be rushed into surrendering rights. And while Halverson tried different pressure tactics, stepping closer, talking louder, implying consequences, something else was happening around them. The neighborhood was paying attention. Two neighbors recorded from different angles. The homeowner recorded too. No chaos, no crowd, just documentation. And in a moment like that, documentation became the real authority. Halverson could feel it. The porch had turned into a record. Every word, every threat, every step forward was now something that could be reviewed later by people who didn't accept "because I said so" as an explanation. That was when the final piece landed. Something about the homeowner that Halverson clearly hadn't anticipated when he came up the walkway. His posture shifted again, sharper this time. Like a person realizing he wasn't the one putting someone on the spot. He was the one being tested. Halverson tried to recover control the way officers like him usually did, by doubling down. He kept the pressure on, leaning into urgency and authority, acting like the homeowner was the obstacle instead of his lack of legal paperwork. He pushed the idea that refusing him would look bad, that cooperation was the safer choice, that he could make the situation harder if she kept saying no. But the homeowner stayed steady and procedural. She didn't argue feelings. She didn't match his volume. She kept the issue narrow. Without a warrant, he had no legal right to enter. And with each repeated demand from Halverson, the recordings became more valuable. Because intimidation only works when it disappears afterward. Here it wasn't disappearing. Two neighbors kept filming from different angles, and the homeowner's own recording captured his tone and her calm refusal in a clean timeline. That meant if Halverson later tried to rewrite the story, claim consent, claim a threat, claim something in plain view, there would be receipts. That's when Halverson made his first real mistake. He let frustration show. Not a dramatic explosion, just enough to reveal what was underneath the Investigation Act. An officer used to people folding, suddenly facing someone who wouldn't. The mask slipped in a way cameras love. Subtle, clear, and impossible to explain away. Then the turning point hit. The homeowner identified herself clearly as Judge Alana Whitaker, a U.S. federal judge. You could feel the power shift without anyone needing to shout. Halverson didn't suddenly become polite because he respected the law. He recalculated because he understood consequences. A federal judge meant oversight. It meant credibility. It meant his Bodycam footage wouldn't just stay inside a department drawer. It meant his "I felt threatened" shortcut wouldn't land the way it sometimes did. And he knew he was still standing there with no warrant. So he backed down. Not with an apology. Not with accountability in the moment. More like a retreat. Pulling his demands back. Stepping away from the door. Ending the confrontation before it became a career-ending clip. He walked off the porch and left. The neighbors kept recording until he was gone, because that's what people did now when they'd seen too much go unchecked. They made sure the ending was captured, too. And that night, the story didn't stay on the street. The footage moved quickly, shared in neighborhood groups, sent to local contacts, forwarded to people who knew how complaints actually got processed. The same night, formal complaints were filed. Not vague ones, specific ones. Timestamps, multiple angles, officer name, narrative consistent across recordings, which meant the department couldn't handle it the old way. They couldn't call it, he said, she said. They couldn't quietly dismiss it as a misunderstanding, because it wasn't just a resident's word this time. It was documented conduct with witnesses and a homeowner whose professional role made the stakes impossible to ignore. By the next morning, the department had a problem it couldn't downplay. This wasn't a messy story with conflicting accounts. It was clean footage from multiple angles, time-stamped, showing an officer claiming urgency, demanding entry without a warrant, and trying to pressure a homeowner into giving up rights. The Bodycam and dispatch logs would either match the story or expose it further. Either way, there was no easy way to bury it. And because the homeowner was a federal judge, the usual slow walk tactics didn't make sense. The complaint wasn't going to get lost. The questions weren't going to be brushed off. The department had to respond like it expected scrutiny, because it did. Internal review started fast. Supervisors pulled Halverson's reports and compared them to what the cameras showed. They checked whether there had actually been a narcotics operation tied to that address. They checked whether he'd been sent there or whether he'd freelanced it. They looked at how he described the encounter afterward, because that's where patterns usually show up. What an officer claimed versus what evidence supported. Then the bigger issue surfaced. Once investigators started digging, the porch incident didn't stay isolated. Complaints that had previously been treated as unproven suddenly looked different when placed next to documented behavior. Stops that residents said felt targeted. Searches residents said felt coerced. Encounters where intimidation did the work that procedure was supposed to do. The review turned from one bad call into repeat behavior. And at that point, the department had two choices: protect the officer and own the scandal, or act like a department that understood liability, trust, and oversight. So Halverson was suspended and put under investigation, not as a symbolic move, but as a necessary one, because the evidence created a risk the department could measure: civil exposure, internal policy violations, and a public record that made "we didn't know" impossible to say with a straight face. For the community, the shift was immediate. People who'd been afraid to complain before saw what documentation could do when it was clear and consistent. The story became a reference point, not gotcha content, but proof that calm boundaries plus recording could stop intimidation before it became something worse. And Judge Whitaker didn't have to give speeches or go on TV to make the point. Her role in the story worked like a spotlight. It showed exactly how an officer behaved when he assumed a resident had no power, and how quickly he changed when he realized the opposite was true. Halverson's career didn't end in that moment on the porch, but it entered a phase it couldn't escape: formal investigation, scrutiny of past conduct, and a real possibility that the badge wouldn't survive what the record revealed. Once the investigation opened, the department's priority wasn't just discipline, it was containment. They had to answer basic questions fast. Why Halverson went to that address, what he claimed he was investigating, and why he tried to push entry without a warrant. With the porch footage already circulating, any gap between his written narrative and what the cameras showed would make things worse. So the review widened. Supervisors and internal affairs pulled prior incidents tied to Halverson and looked for the same markers people had complained about for years: intimidation language, threats framed as routine, vague justification for stops, and reports that leaned heavily on officer discretion while offering thin facts. That's where the pattern became hard to ignore. It wasn't one misunderstanding. It was repetition. Similar complaints, similar tactics, and similar outcomes. Except this time there was clean documentation and a homeowner with legal authority who couldn't be brushed aside. Community response shifted too. Residents who'd stayed quiet started filing their own complaints, not because they suddenly trusted the system, but because they saw something rare, a moment where evidence forced the system to respond. Some shared dates, badge numbers, and past interactions. Others offered to provide footage they'd kept but never thought would matter. And inside the department, the pressure wasn't just public, it was legal and procedural. A federal judge involved meant the department had to assume oversight would be serious, and that sloppy handling could turn a personnel issue into a much larger problem. Halverson's suspension stopped being the headline and became the beginning, an active investigation that threatened his certification, his position, and the department's credibility if they failed to act. By the end of that week, the message around Maplewood was clear and practical. Intimidation worked best in private, and it fell apart in public. After the suspension hit, the department tried to regain control of the narrative. They issued careful, generic statements about a review and policy compliance, the kind of language meant to calm the public without admitting fault. But the footage made that difficult because people didn't need interpretations anymore. They'd already seen the behavior. And once a department is forced into a review under public pressure, the next battle is always the same, whether it becomes a real investigation or a procedural cleanup. In Halverson's case, it leaned real. Investigators started checking what he had claimed that night against what could be verified: calls, assignments, any documented narcotics operation connected to that address. The wrong house detail became central because it raised an uncomfortable possibility. He hadn't been following a real lead, he'd been following a habit. At the same time, the older complaints gained weight. People who'd been dismissed before now looked credible in hindsight because the porch footage showed a consistent style: forcing urgency, using threats to create compliance, then relying on the fact that most residents didn't have the time, money, or influence to fight back. Judge Whitaker didn't need to campaign against him. Her involvement did something stronger. It removed the department's ability to pretend the issue was unclear. Her calm refusal, the clear recordings, and the fact that she knew exactly what lawful procedure required made the contrast obvious. By the end of the process, Halverson's situation stopped being an officer who made a mistake and became an officer whose pattern finally got documented in a way that couldn't be explained away. And that was the long-term consequence. His career wasn't threatened by one confrontation alone. It was threatened because the confrontation exposed everything behind it. As the investigation moved forward, the story stopped being about one porch confrontation and turned into a department-wide test. Because now Internal Affairs wasn't just looking at what Halverson did that night. They were looking at whether supervisors had ignored warning signs, whether prior complaints had been dismissed too easily, and whether procedure had become something selectively enforced, depending on who was standing on the other side of the badge. That's why the review exposed more than Halverson's behavior. It exposed how predictable his behavior had become. Residents described the same approach over and over: escalation first, paperwork later, pressure to comply, then a report written to justify the pressure. And once those accounts lined up with the porch footage, the department couldn't treat them like isolated grievances anymore. Halverson tried the usual defenses, framing it as misunderstanding, claiming urgency, implying he was acting in good faith. But the recordings limited how far that could go. Multiple angles and clear audio meant the department couldn't interpret away the central issue. He demanded entry without a warrant and used intimidation to try to get it. So the consequences sharpened. His suspension held. The investigation expanded, and with it came the real career threat: findings that could lead to termination, decertification, and potential outside scrutiny if the department's handling looked like a cover-up. Meanwhile, in Maplewood, something changed that departments often underestimate. People started documenting more, not out of paranoia, but out of pattern recognition. The community had just watched proof do what complaints alone couldn't. The lesson wasn't everyone is out to get you. The lesson was, if it happens, preserve it. And Judge Whitaker's role became a quiet example of how to handle power. She didn't scream, she didn't chase attention, and she didn't bend. She stayed calm, stayed inside the law, and let evidence carry the weight. That was the lasting impact. Halverson's intimidation only worked when it stayed private. The moment it became public, it started falling apart, piece by piece, complaint by complaint, until the system had no choice but to confront what it had been allowing. By the time the department finished pulling records, Maplewood understood what the porch incident really was. It wasn't a random mistake. It was a moment where a familiar tactic finally met three things intimidation couldn't beat: clear legal boundaries, multiple witnesses, and clean documentation. The department's internal review didn't just focus on that night. It forced leadership to confront what had been tolerated. An officer treating narcotics like a shortcut word, using threats to manufacture cooperation, and relying on the assumption that most people wouldn't be able to fight back. That assumption failed the second the cameras came out. Judge Alana Whitaker didn't win because she was louder. She won because she was precise. She didn't let the encounter drift into emotion or confusion. She kept it about one issue, no warrant, no entry, and let the recordings preserve everything else. And Halverson's retreat told the real truth. He wasn't confident in his legal footing. He was confident in people being too scared to challenge him. Once the footage spread, the complaints didn't feel like whispers anymore. They became a file, a pattern, a risk the department could no longer ignore without exposing itself. His suspension and investigation weren't just about punishing one officer. They were about the department trying to prove it wasn't the kind of place that protected behavior like that. The lesson that stuck with the community was practical, not dramatic. Procedure protects people, and evidence forces systems to act. So here's the question. If you were standing at that door, would you have known your rights well enough to stay calm? And if you were one of the neighbors, would you have recorded quietly, clearly, so the truth couldn't be rewritten later? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs the reminder that boundaries matter. And subscribe for more story times like this, grounded, realistic, and focused on accountability.